Jax Thorne, former diplomat turned unwilling resident of the orbital megaprison, Celestial Bastille, was contemplating the finer points of his new reality over a breakfast that could only be described as a war crime against taste buds. The food might have been designed by nutritional experts, but it tasted like something scraped off the bottom of a shoe. He poked at it with the kind of care usually reserved for disarming bombs. "Morning, sunshine," growled a voice behind him. It was Bront, a hulking alien with skin like volcanic rock who had the charm of a rusty nail driven through your foot. "Bront," Jax replied, not bothering to turn around. "I see you're still violating everyone's right to peace and quiet." The alien chuckled, a sound like someone gargling gravel. "If I didn't know better, I'd say you're avoiding the delightful company of your fellow inmates. You'd be surprised how easy it is to avoid people when you don't view every conversation as potential foreplay," Jax shot back. He finally turned around, giving Bront his best diplomatic grin. It was the kind of smile that had once sealed trade deals and now merely kept his skull unscrambled. Celestial Bastille orbited a gas giant somewhere inconveniently far from the rest of civilized space. The prison was a marvel of alien engineering, which meant it worked only half the time and the other half it tried to kill you. A perfect metaphor for Jax's life, a series of disasters held together by sarcastic comments and duct tape. The cafeteria was a mosaic of species, all unified by an overwhelming sense of shared misery. Aliens with tentacles, scales, feathers, all eyeing each other with suspicion, hatred, or, in rare cases, mild indifference. "What's the gossip this morning?" Jax asked, digging into his meal with the enthusiasm of a man chewing on cardboard. Bront shrugged, a complicated maneuver involving shoulders somewhere near his midsection. "Same old. Paxians in Block D are threatening to eat the guards again." "Lovely. I've always said nothing builds community spirit like a good riot," Jax replied. "Any word on the Singularity Gate crisis?" "Oh, you mean the thing that might turn the galaxy into cosmic soup?" "Yeah, not much." Bront scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Rumor is they're sending someone important to inspect the place." "Important people in a place like this. It's like a politician at a truth convention, strange and utterly pointless," Jax mused. Bront leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "Word is it's not just any VIP. It's someone who might actually know how to fix this mess." Jax raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. "Well, that's something. Maybe they'll need someone with a way with words." "Sure, Jax, maybe they'll need a smooth-talking diplomat," Bront said with a laugh. "Or maybe they'll just want someone who knows which end of a plasma rifle to point at the bad guys." Their conversation was interrupted by the shriek of the prison alarms. Lights flashed, and a synthesized voice droned over the comm system in a tone that suggested it was just as bored with its job as everyone else. "All inmates to assembly points. All inmates to assembly points." "Sounds like another joyful day in paradise," Jax muttered. He stood, abandoning his unappetizing breakfast, and followed the flow of grumbling prisoners out of the cafeteria. The assembly point was a cavernous hall that served as a multipurpose space, part gym, part lecture theater, part accountability nightmare. Guards with the personality of stunned batons watched from the perimeter, their expressions hidden behind helmets as if they were ashamed to be seen enforcing the law in a place like this. Jax found himself next to an alien whose face resembled a malfunctioning accordion. Its skin pulsed with an unsettling rhythm, like it was privately listening to some club music. "New here?" Jax asked, determined to maintain his standing as the most annoying person in the room. "Just transferred," the alien replied, its voice a chorus of squeaks. "What's the deal with this place?" Jax snorted. "You mean other than the fact that it's the galaxy's most depressing game of musical chairs? We're all waiting for the Singularity Gate to do something interesting." "Interesting?" the alien echoed, incredulous. "Like what? Explode?" "Precisely," Jax said with a grin. "Really livens up the day." The crowd hushed as the warden, A beetle-like creature with a shiny carapace that screamed midlife crisis stepped onto the dais. Its voice was amplified to a grating screech that could strip paint. "Prisoners," it began, "today we receive a visit from a representative of the Galactic Council. We expect complete cooperation." The announcement was met with a chorus of boos and a few colorful suggestions about what the council could do with their visit. "You're all charm and grace," Jax muttered under his breath. The warden continued, unfazed. "The representative will be conducting an inspection. Any disruptions will be dealt with severely." Jax exchanged a look with Bront, who had somehow materialized next to him. "I guess that means no welcoming committee, probably for the best," Bront replied. "Remember what happened last time?" Jax winced, recalling the chaos of the last inspection, which had ended with half the guards in the infirmary and the rest in therapy. "Hard to forget. They still haven't found all the pieces of that poor guy's dignity." As the assembly dispersed, Jax hung back, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. The Singularity Gate crisis was the elephant in the room, or more accurately, the black hole in the galaxy. It was a problem big enough to swallow worlds, and no one seemed to have a clue how to stop it. The Singularity Gates had once been the crowning achievement of human ingenuity, a network allowing instantaneous travel across the galaxy. Until they'd started acting up, that is. Now they were as reliable as a politician's promise, and just as likely to blow up in your face. "You getting any funny feelings about all this?" Jax asked Bront as they headed back towards their cells. "I constantly have funny feelings," Bront replied. "But yeah, this one's special. Seems like someone's scared." "Scared?" Jax scoffed. "Now there's a comforting thought." Back in his cell, a cramped affair that felt like the inside of a coffin with a view, Jax tried to relax. The thin mattress did little to cushion his bones, and the walls were decorated with motivational slogans that were about as inspiring as a tax audit. He lay back, staring at the ceiling. Somewhere out there, beyond the metal walls and energy shields, the Singularity Gates were quietly plotting the galaxy's downfall. And here he was, a washed-up diplomat with a penchant for sarcasm, stuck in a prison that had all the security of a chocolate teapot. There was a knock on the door, a rare courtesy in a place where politeness was as extinct as empathy. A guard poked their head in, helmet tucked under their arm, revealing a scarred face that was half human, half mechanical. "Thorn," the guard said gruffly, "you've got a visitor." "Unless it's my parole officer with a winning lottery ticket, I'm not interested," Jax replied. "Not your choice, I'm afraid. Council's orders," the guard insisted. Intrigued, Jax sat up, swinging his legs over the side of the bed with all the enthusiasm of a coma patient. "Council, eh? Maybe they've finally realized the error of their ways, like putting me in here for starters." The guard didn't laugh. They never did. Moments later, Jax found himself in a sparse meeting room, face to face with a woman who was the physical embodiment of career bureaucrat. Her suit was as immaculate as her expression was unreadable. "Jax Thorn," she said, her voice clipped and precise, like she'd practiced it in front of a mirror for hours. "I'm here to discuss your potential role in resolving the Singularity Gate situation." Jax raised an eyebrow. "My role? Last I checked, I was here on a permanent vacation." The woman didn't smile, which Jax decided was probably a good thing. He doubted her face was used to it. "The council believes your diplomatic skills could be invaluable." "Diplomatic skills?" Jax echoed. "I'm flattered you think sarcasm and the ability to insult people in 3 languages are skills. It's more your familiarity with alien cultures," she replied, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Your experience could be crucial." "So, what's the plan?" Jax asked, leaning back in his chair. "You spring me from this floating funhouse and I save the galaxy." "Something like that," she conceded. "Are you interested?" Jax considered it, watching her with the kind of speculative interest usually reserved for a snake charmer about to stick their head in a cobra's mouth. "I always did like a good challenge," he said finally. "Good," she replied, standing. "We'll be in touch." As she left, Jax couldn't help but smile. It was the kind of smile that upset people, an unsettling grin that promised trouble. He was going to play diplomat again, something he never thought he'd do. But this time was different. This time, the stakes were higher than ever, and the margin for error was non-existent. But Jax had always thrived in impossible situations. With the galaxy's fate hanging in the balance, he had a feeling this would be his most interesting gig yet. The Celestial Bastille, a floating monument to the futility of order in a universe fueled by chaos. Its corridors twisted like the intestines of some cosmic beast, populated by guards who had clearly left their personalities at home. If the prison was a buffet, then misery was the main course, with a side order of despair and a dollop of "what the hell is wrong with this place?" Jax Thorne strolled back to his cell after his little tete-a-tete with the Galactic Council's ambassador of joylessness. The idea of being sprung from this orbital hellhole was appealing, but there was a catch. There was always a catch, and this one was the size of a dying star. The Singularity Gate crisis was the talk of the galaxy, and not in the good way that involved parties and fireworks. No, this was the kind of crisis that made people stock up on canned goods and build bunkers in their backyards. The gates, those marvelous interstellar shortcuts, were going haywire, blinking in and out of existence like a faulty holo ad, threatening to turn space travel into a cosmic lottery. Jax found Bront lounging near his cell door, looking like a volcanic boulder that couldn't quite decide if it wanted to roll downhill or just sit there and contemplate life's futility. "You look like you just got handed a death sentence," Bront observed, his voice a rumbling growl that could vibrate the fillings right out of your teeth. "Close enough," Jax replied, leaning against the wall. "They want me to help fix the Singularity Gate mess." Bront nodded slowly, the kind of nod that suggested he was processing the information with the speed of a glacier. "Let me guess, they think a smooth-talking human can charm the gates into submission, something like that. They're scared of us, you know." "Scared of humans," Bront chuckled, a sound like rocks tumbling in a landslide. "I suppose you are unpredictable. Like a grenade with commitment issues." "Exactly," Jax said with a smirk. "They're worried we might actually figure this out before they do." The prison's alien overseers were a motley collection of species, each with their own unique blend of paranoia and superiority complex. But they all shared one thing, a healthy fear of human adaptability. The galaxy's most troublesome species had a habit of turning dire situations to their advantage, and the chaos of a malfunctioning Singularity Gate system was no exception. As they spoke, a pair of guards lumbered past, their armor clanking with the grace of a malfunctioning robot. They eyed Jax and Bront with a suspicion usually reserved for uninvited guests at a wedding. "Security's tightening up," Jax noted, watching the guards disappear around the corner. "Guess they don't want us getting any ideas." "Smart move," Bront rumbled. "Considering you humans are known for thinking outside the box, sometimes right out of the airlock." "Funny thing about boxes," Jax mused. "They're not as effective when the lid's gone missing." The Singularity Gates had been a marvel, a testament, no, scratch that, a mistake to the ingenuity of the species who dared to tame the stars. But now they were failing, and the galaxy was collectively holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable disaster. The fear in the air was thicker than the sludge they served in the cafeteria, and you didn't need to be a diplomat to smell it. Later, in the dim confines of his cell, Jax lay on his back, staring at the metal ceiling with a look of concentration that suggested he was either deep in thought or had just realized he'd been wearing mismatched socks all day. The council's offer was tempting. Freedom dangled before him like a carrot in front of a very sarcastic donkey. But he couldn't shake the feeling that this whole thing was going to blow up in his face. The next day, the prison buzzed with an energy that was almost palpable. Whispers and rumors spread faster than a bad case of space flu. Everyone knew something was up, and it wasn't just the usual gripe about the showers. Jax found himself in the cafeteria once more, pushing indeterminate food around his tray with all the enthusiasm of a condemned man facing his last meal. The room was filled with the usual assortment of aliens, each more bizarre than the last, all united by the common bond of captivity. "You hear the latest?" Bront asked, slumping down beside him with a tray piled high with something that might have been food in another life. "Let me guess, the Paxians are planning to riot again. Worse, the guards are saying the council's going to bring in experts to stabilize the gates." Jax raised an eyebrow. "Experts? In a place like this? Sounds like bringing a violinist to a gunfight." Bront shrugged. "I overheard them talking. Apparently, they're worried about humans using the chaos to cut a deal with the other species." "Of course they are," Jax replied with a snort. "Nothing like a good existential threat to bring out the best in interspecies cooperation." "Think they'll succeed?" Jax leaned back, a cynical smile playing on his lips. "If history's taught me anything, it's that when humans are involved, success is just another word for 'I can't believe we survived that.'" Their conversation was cut short by a commotion at the far side of the cafeteria. A group of Paxians, their pale blue skin glinting under the harsh lights, were squaring off against a cluster of guards. Voices rose, an incomprehensible jumble of languages that sounded like a fight in a synthesizer factory. Jax watched with a kind of detached interest. Fights were a common occurrence in the Bastille, as regular as breakfast and just as enjoyable. But this felt different. There was a tension in the air, a sense of impending catastrophe that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Bront nudged him with an elbow that could crack ribs. "Looks like the welcoming committee's getting rowdy." "Typical," Jax muttered. "I bet the council's representative is thrilled to witness our hospitality." As the situation escalated, the guards tried to restore order with all the subtlety of a rhino in a china shop. Fists flew, and the sound of impacts echoed through the room like a well-rehearsed percussion ensemble. Jax sighed and stood, knowing he'd be dragged into the fray whether he liked it or not. "Time to play peacemaker," he said, rolling his shoulders. "Good luck," Bront chuckled, already retreating to a safe distance. "I'll be here supervising." Jax waded into the chaos, dodging a stray punch with the practiced ease of someone who had spent too much time in the wrong places at the wrong times. He managed to get between the two factions, arms raised in a display of mock heroism. "All right, everyone, let's save the fighting for the big leagues," he called out, injecting just the right amount of sarcasm into his voice. "I doubt the council wants to watch a brawl on their tour." A Paxian swung at him, more out of reflex than malice. Jax ducked, feeling the air whistle past his ear. "Watch it, pal," he said, smirking. "I'm too pretty to bruise." The melee slowed, the participants eyeing each other warily, as if remembering they had bigger problems to worry about, like surviving. "Let's all take a deep breath," Jax suggested, mostly to himself. "And remember that we're all stuck in this nightmare together." The tension in the room ebbed, the moment of violence passing like a bad joke. The guards, grateful for the reprieve, moved to escort the prisoners back to their cells, muttering about paperwork and damage reports. Jax returned to his meal, or what was left of it, feeling a little more alive than he had in weeks. There was something invigorating about stopping a fight, even if it was just delaying the inevitable. "You're a regular diplomat," Bront remarked as he settled back into his seat. "I try," Jax replied, his grin as tired as it was genuine. "Keeps me in practice." As the day wore on, the buzz of anticipation in the Bastille refused to fade. The council's visit was more than just a bureaucratic check-in. It was a sign that something big was on the horizon, and Jax, despite his best efforts, couldn't help but feel a thrill of excitement at the prospect. The singularity gates were a problem that demanded a solution. And if the galaxy's overlords thought humans might be part of that solution, then who was he to argue? Later, as the artificial night settled over the prison, Jax lay in his bunk, contemplating his place in the universe. The ceiling above him was a blank slate, as comforting as it was oppressive. He closed his eyes, letting the darkness wash over him. Somewhere out there, beyond the confines of his cell, the gates were waiting for someone to step up to make a choice to save the galaxy from itself. And maybe, just maybe, that someone was him. But until then, he had a prison to survive, a role to play, and a galaxy to potentially save. No pressure. Just another day in the life of Jax Thorne. Jax Thorne had always been a firm believer in the philosophy that things could always get worse, but even he was surprised by how quickly his day went from bad to, "Oh, look, we're all gonna die." The cafeteria was still buzzing from the brawl, and Jax was nursing a bruise that was forming a lovely shade of purple just above his left eye. It matched his mood quite nicely. Bront trudged alongside him, mumbling something about how his fists were getting rusty and needed the exercise. Jax could only agree, though he wished that exercise came with fewer broken tables and more actual solutions to the prison's problems. As they shuffled back to their cells, Jax couldn't shake the feeling that the air was charged with more tension than usual. It was like the whole place was holding its breath, waiting for something to snap. Of course, in a prison like the Celestial Bastille, that was practically a daily occurrence. Still, today felt different, and not in a good way. The buzzing continued well into the night. Jax found himself lying on his bunk, staring at the ceiling again. Only this time he wasn't contemplating mismatched socks. He was thinking about survival. Because that's what this place did to you. It made you think about survival in ways that made your skin crawl. He was just drifting off into a fitful sleep when the door to his cell slid open with the subtlety of a jackhammer. "Thorne," came a voice that could only belong to a guard with a speech impediment or a very disgruntled electronic device. "Visitor." "Great," Jax muttered, swinging his legs over the side of the bunk. "Must be my lucky day." Bront, in the cell across from him, was already snoring like a malfunctioning starship engine. At least someone was getting some rest. Jax followed the guard down the dimly lit corridor, wondering what fresh hell awaited him. It wasn't every day you got a visitor in this place, unless you counted the rodents that occasionally dropped by for a chat, and they were terrible conversationalists. He was led into a small room that smelled faintly of desperation and cleaning products. Across the table sat a figure cloaked in a shadow that seemed to cling to them like an overzealous fan. The light flickering overhead did little to illuminate the visitor's features. "Thorne," the figure said in a voice that was too smooth, too rehearsed. "We need to talk." "Do we?" Jax replied, sliding into the chair with the grace of someone who was used to uncomfortable situations. "Or is this just one of those chats where I listen and leave more confused than when I walked in?" The figure chuckled, a sound that made Jax think of knives being sharpened. "You've been causing quite a stir here, human." "Yeah, well," Jax shrugged. "When you're in a place like this, you find ways to amuse yourself. Some people juggle. I just happen to play peacemaker during food fights." "I'm not here about your extracurricular activities," the figure said, leaning forward, allowing the light to catch their eyes, yellow and cat-like. "I'm here because there's a movement within the prison. A faction of alien prisoners planning to sabotage the Bastille." Jax raised an eyebrow, trying to look nonchalant while his brain was attempting to process this new information. "Sabotage? That's a bit cliché, isn't it? What, are they going to make a bomb out of cafeteria tater tots?" The visitor didn't seem amused. "They have plans to disrupt communications, disable security systems. They want to ensure no human leaves this place alive." "Charming," Jax said, tapping his fingers on the table. "And where do I fit in this little coup de grace? I'm not exactly a fan of going up in flames." "You're a mediator. You have a way with words," the figure said, their lips curling into a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "We need you to broker peace. Convince them that there's a way out of here that doesn't involve mass destruction." Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. "And why should I help you? Last I checked, maintaining the status quo isn't a top priority for me. Help us and the council will make sure your sentence is significantly reduced," the visitor promised. "Maybe even erased." Ah, the classic carrot on a stick routine, Jax thought. Except this carrot was more like a hologram, impossibly tempting but annoyingly out of reach. Still, what did he have to lose, besides his life, which seemed to be a perpetually endangered species in this place? "All right," Jack said, leaning back in his chair. "I'll see what I can do, but no promises. You know how fickle us humans can be." The visitor nodded, standing up. "We'll be in touch. Remember, Thorn. The galaxy is counting on you." "Yeah, yeah." Jax waved a dismissive hand. "Tell the galaxy I said hi." As the visitor disappeared into the shadows, Jax was left with the weight of the task ahead. He didn't have much time to dwell on it, though, as the guard soon escorted him back to his cell. Bront was waiting for him, looking about as concerned as a mountain might look at an incoming rainstorm. "So," Bront rumbled, his voice low enough to be a classified weapon, "what was all that about?" "Oh, you know," Jack said, flopping back onto his bunk. "Just a light-hearted chat about our impending doom. Nothing serious." Bront grunted, which was about as close to laughter as he ever got. "This place is going to implode one day." "Yeah," Jax agreed. "But hopefully not today." The next morning, Jax was up and about, doing his best to blend in while also keeping his ears open for any whispers, any hints of rebellion brewing beneath the surface of the Bastille's daily grind. He found himself wandering the corridors, nodding to the various prisoners he passed. There were the Paxians, still nursing their bruises from yesterday's altercation, and the Sarnathi, with their constant bickering that sounded more like a poorly tuned orchestra. And then there were the humans, a motley crew if ever there was one. Jax gravitated towards them, finding solace in the shared camaraderie of being the galaxy's most unpredictable species. He found a group of them huddled in the corner of the recreation area, their heads bent in a conversation that stopped the moment he approached. "Don't stop on my account," Jax said, smirking. "Just here to see if we're planning anything fun for tonight's entertainment." The tallest of the group, a woman with a scar that zigzagged across her face like a drunk mapmaker's attempt at a treasure trail, looked him up and down. "You're Thorn, right? The guy who thinks he can talk his way out of anything." "That's me," Jax replied, giving her his most winning smile. It probably looked more like a grimace, but he was working with what he had. "Word is," she continued, "you're trying to broker peace between the factions. How's that going for you?" "About as well as you'd expect," Jax said, rubbing the back of his neck. "But I'm hoping to change that." "Good luck," she said, crossing her arms. "Everyone's on edge. They think the Council's visit is just smoke and mirrors, that when they leave we'll be left to deal with whatever mess they decide to ignore." "That's why I'm here," Jax said, leaning against the wall. "To make sure we don't end up as collateral damage in someone else's game." "And you think you can do that?" she asked, eyebrow raised. "Honestly," Jack shrugged, "I've got no clue, but I've got nothing to lose by trying." The group exchanged glances, a silent conversation that Jax couldn't fully decipher. Finally, the woman nodded, a reluctant sign of approval. "All right, Thorn," she said, "we'll keep our ears open. If you find a way to keep this place from going up in smoke, let us know." Jax nodded, feeling the weight of their trust settle on his shoulders like an ill-fitting cloak. "I'll do my best." He spent the rest of the day wandering the Bastille, listening and observing, trying to piece together the tangled web of alliances and rivalries that made up the prison's social structure. It was a mess, a chaotic jumble of factions and groups, each with their own agendas and grievances. And somewhere in that mess was the key to stopping the sabotage. He just had to find it before someone else did. As the artificial night descended once again, Jax found himself back in the cafeteria, staring at the unappetizing meal before him. The room was filled with the usual cacophony of voices, but beneath it all he could sense the undercurrent of tension, the simmering resentment that threatened to boil over at any moment. Bront joined him, a tray piled high with food that had the consistency of paste. "Any luck?" "I'm working on it," Jax said, pushing his food around with a fork. "But this place is like a pressure cooker. One wrong move and we're all gonna get scalded." "Then make sure you don't trip over the cord," Bront replied, his voice dry as the desert sands of his homeworld. Jax chuckled, a hollow sound that felt out of place in the grim surroundings. "I'll do my best." They lapsed into silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Jax's mind was a whirl of possibilities and half-formed plans, each one more precarious than the last. He needed to talk to the leaders of the factions, to find a way to bring them to the table without turning it into a battlefield. But that required a level of diplomacy that he wasn't sure he possessed. Still, he had to try. Because if he didn't, the Bastille would become a tomb for everyone inside, human, alien, and everything in between. The night wore on, the minutes dragging by with agonizing slowness. Jax lay in his bunk, staring at the ceiling once more, his mind buzzing with thoughts that refused to settle. He needed allies, needed to find those who would listen, who would help him bridge the divide between the factions. And he needed to do it fast before the situation spiraled out of control. With a sigh, he closed his eyes, willing sleep to come, knowing that tomorrow would bring another set of challenges, another round of negotiations and scheming. But that was tomorrow. For now, he let the darkness take him, hoping that when he woke, he'd have a clearer path forward. Because in the end, survival was about more than just getting by. It was about finding a way to live, even in a place that seemed determined to grind you down to nothing. And if Jax Thorne was anything, he was a survivor. The Celestial Bastille's alarm system, a jarring mix of sirens and flashing lights, could wake the dead, though in this place that was more a cautionary tale than a saying. The whole prison went into lockdown, doors slamming shut with a finality that even the most hardened inmates couldn't ignore. The guards, as mechanical as the coffee they served each morning, moved with a sense of urgency usually reserved for when the cafeteria ran out of flavorless stew. Jax Thorne found himself once more in the cafeteria, looking at what was supposed to be breakfast but could easily double as a building material. Bront sat across from him, working through his own pile of mush with the determination of a miner digging for gold in a sand dune. "Well, this is new," Jax commented, pushing his plate away. "You think they finally decided to lock us in for our own safety?" Bront grunted, which was his eloquent way of agreeing. "Probably had a meeting, decided we were having too much fun." "You know," Jax mused, rubbing his chin theatrically, "I always thought our charming personalities would be the death of us. But it might just be their incompetence that does it." Before Bront could offer another of his monosyllabic insights, the announcement system crackled to life. The alien voice that came through was distorted, but Jax could make out enough to realize they were dealing with a scheduled disaster. "Attention, all inmates," the voice droned, with all the warmth of a glacier. "Due to an ongoing investigation into potential sabotage, the facility is now under full lockdown. Remain in your current locations until further notice." Jax exchanged a look with Bront, the kind of look that said, "Well, shit." "So, what's the plan, Peacemaker?" Bront asked, as if Jax had the keys to the universe tucked in his back pocket. "Plan," Jax snorted. "Oh, you mean the thing we usually do where I make it up as we go along and hope nobody dies horribly?" "Yeah, that." "Right," Jax said, standing up and stretching his arms, feeling the constraints of the moment like a bad itch. "Guess we should start by finding out who's pulling the strings around here." Bront nodded, finishing off his meal with the enthusiasm of a man who'd long forgotten what flavor was. "Lead the way, Thorne." They made their way out of the cafeteria, weaving through clusters of inmates who were either too confused or too uninterested to care. The lockdown had everyone on edge, whispering conspiracies and rumors like gossiping schoolchildren. Jax's mind ran through a mental checklist. He needed to contact the human and alien factions he'd been negotiating with, try to keep things from blowing up, figuratively and literally. First stop was the human quarters, a section of the Bastille that was more run down than the rest, smelling faintly of desperation and bad decisions. Jax found the makeshift Council of Humans, a ragtag group of leaders who'd somehow been elected, or more likely, just shouted the loudest. The woman with the scar, who Jax had come to know as Sierra, crossed her arms as he approached. "Thorn, I hear you're playing hero again." "Hero's a strong word," Jax replied, giving her a look that was equal parts charm and sarcasm. "I prefer pragmatic disaster manager." "Right?" Sierra said, her tone as dry as a Martian summer. "So what's the deal? Are we all going to die, or is this just another day on the job?" "Depends," Jax said. "What have you heard?" Sierra sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Rumors are flying. Some say the aliens are planning a breakout. Others think the Council's just using this as an excuse to tighten the screws on us." "Can't say I'm surprised," Jax said, nodding. "Look, we need to work together. Humans, aliens, everyone. If we don't, we'll be the ones who get squashed when this all goes to hell." Sierra gave him a look that suggested she'd heard enough motivational speeches to last a lifetime. "And how do you propose we do that, Thorn? Last time I checked, we're not exactly holding hands and singing Kumbaya around here. We start small," Jax said, leaning in. "I've got a few contacts among the other factions. Get them to the table, see if we can't hash something out." Sierra studied him, her gaze hard enough to cut steel. "All right, Thorn. We'll back you, but if this goes south, it's your head on the chopping block." "Got it." "Wouldn't have it any other way," Jax replied, giving a mock salute before heading off with Bront in tow. Next stop was the Paxians, a species whose temperament was as volatile as their sense of humor was non-existent. Jax found their spokesperson, a spindly creature named Crix, in a corner of the recreation area, surrounded by a few of his kin. "Thorn," Crix said, his voice a series of clicks and pitches that Jax had learned to understand through sheer necessity. "Heard you were meddling again." "Just trying to keep the peace," Jax said, throwing up his hands in a universal gesture of "I'm harmless, please don't eat me. You know, save all of our skins in the process." Crix tilted his head, considering. "And why should we trust you, human? Your kind is not known for predictable behavior." "True," Jax admitted with a grin. "But that's what makes us so damn charming, isn't it?" Crix made a noise that might have been a laugh or a cough. "What do you propose?" "Simple," Jax said, stepping closer. "We get everyone to the table, air our grievances, figure out how to stop this sabotage before it turns this place into a cosmic barbecue." Crix clicked thoughtfully. "A bold plan. But boldness is often mistaken for foolishness." "Yeah, well," Jax shrugged, "I've always been a bit of both. So are you in?" Crix exchanged glances with his compatriots and finally nodded. "Very well, Thorn, we'll listen. But if you betray us, your unpredictability will be your downfall." "Wouldn't dream of it," Jax assured him, already moving toward his next target. As the day dragged on, Jax met with representatives from the Sarnathi and other key groups within the prison. Each meeting was a delicate dance of words and promises, with Jax trying to keep his own head above water while convincing others not to drown him. Finally, as the artificial night descended and the Bastille's lights dimmed into their nightly gloom, Jax gathered everyone in the cafeteria, a neutral ground made slightly less neutral by the ever-present stench of despair and yesterday's soup. The room buzzed with the low murmur of conversation, tension hanging thick enough to slice with a dull spoon. Jax stood before them, aware that this was a moment where words could either save them or doom them all. "All right, listen up," he called out, raising his voice above the din. "We've got a problem. Some of you already know the details, others don't. But the short of it is, someone's planning to sabotage this place, and if they succeed, we're all toast." Burnt to a crisp, he let that sink in for a moment, looking around at the gathered crowd. Aliens of all shapes and sizes, humans of all shades and backgrounds, each one a thread in a tangled knot of alliances. "So, here's the deal," Jax continued. "We work together, we find out who's behind this, and we stop them. I'm not asking you to love each other, hell, I'm not even asking you to like each other. Just don't kill each other long enough to fix this mess." A murmur of agreement, or at least reluctant acceptance, rippled through the crowd. Jax allowed himself a small measure of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could pull this off. Sierra spoke up from where she stood, arms crossed but her stance as steady as a rock in a turbulent sea. And what if we can't stop it? What then, Thorn? Jax met her gaze, his own resolve mirrored back at him. Then we make sure we're the ones left standing when the dust settles. The room was silent for a beat, tension crackling like static before Crick spoke up, his voice a calculated calm. Very well, human, we will collaborate. But know this, should you falter, should you betray us, there will be no forgiveness. Jax gave a lopsided grin. Trust me, Crix, the last thing I want is to be a cosmic shish kebab. We're in this together. With that, he waved over Bront, who'd been watching from the sidelines with the patience of a man waiting for the universe to implode. You ready for this? Jax asked him, clapping a hand on his shoulder. Born ready, Bront replied, though his expression suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. But if this goes sideways, I'm blaming you, Jax laughed, a sound that held more anxiety than amusement. Fair enough. Now let's figure out how to stop a bunch of pissed-off prisoners from blowing us all to pieces. The night crept on, the cafeteria a hub of whispered conversations and hurried planning. Jax moved through the crowd, talking, listening, doing his best to weave a fragile alliance out of the chaos. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sliver of hope. It was thin, a brittle thing liable to snap under pressure, but it was there. A chance, however slim, that they might make it out of this alive. As he worked, the weight of the task ahead settled on his shoulders, a burden he'd taken on willingly. Because in the end, survival wasn't just about living another day. It was about making sure there was a future to look forward to. And if Jax Thorn was anything, he was a man who knew how to fight for the future, even in a place like the Celestial Bastille. By the time the alarm system blared to life, a shrill cacophony echoing through the Celestial Bastille, Jax was already knee-deep in potential disaster. The makeshift alliance he'd cobbled together had all the solidity of wet tissue paper, and even that was starting to tear. The prison's defenses had been breached, no doubt thanks to whoever had decided to play intergalactic saboteur, and the normally indifferent mechanical guards were now on high alert, scanning for threats that weren't just imaginary this time. Sounds like someone's hosting a party and forgot to invite us, Jax muttered, casting a glance at Bront, who was scowling in his usual fashion, which meant his eyebrows were doing a dance somewhere between confused and murderous. Yeah, Bront grunted, his version of a soliloquy. Bet they've got snacks. The cafeteria was a hotbed of chaos, every species reacting in their own special way to the impending doom. Sierra was there, ordering her fellow humans to batten down whatever hatches they could find in a place that had no actual ships, just a whole lot of corridors that felt like a maze designed by a sadistic child. You've got a plan, right, Thorn? Sierra asked, her voice cutting through the din like a knife through stale bread. She looked about as trusting as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. Jax waved a dismissive hand. Oh sure, loads of plans. None of them good, mind you, but they're plans. Care to elaborate? Not really, Jax said with a shrug. But I suppose we should start by not dying. After that, maybe we stop whoever's trying to turn this place into a giant vacuum-sealed tomb. Sounds like a solid strategy, Sierra replied dryly. Failing upward, Thorn. Jax grinned, though it was a touch more strained than usual. Wouldn't be the first time. Bront, who had been listening with the intensity of a man trying to remember if he left the stove on, suddenly pointed toward the far end of the cafeteria. Problem. Jax turned to see what Bront had spotted. The problem was big, ugly, and wearing a uniform that marked it as one of the alien overseers, a species with more appendages than sense and a reputation for being highly efficient at exactly one thing: prison management. And by management, they meant stomping out any semblance of rebellion with the enthusiasm of a boot meeting an anthill. The overseer was backed by a contingent of mechanical guards, all armed with weapons that looked like they'd been designed by someone with a real grudge against living things. The overseer raised a limb, which might have been a hand, and barked something unintelligible but unmistakably hostile. Good, they're here to help, Jax said, voice dripping with sarcasm. Nice to see they're taking the kill all prisoners approach to problem solving. Charming, Bront grunted. Any ideas? Working on it, Jax replied, his mind racing. The alarm was a constant wail, like the universe's worst hold music. He needed to buy time to figure out who was sabotaging the prison systems and why. Crix sidled up next to Jax, his eyes flicking from the overseer to the chaos around them. I assume this is part of your plan, Thorn. Oh, absolutely, Jax answered. I always plan for massive insurrections. Really keeps things lively. We will be crushed, Crix noted as if discussing the weather. Only if we stand in the wrong place, Jax shot back. Look, we need to regroup. Find somewhere those tin cans can't follow us. Sierra was already motioning for the humans to fall back, forming a loose barrier between their group and the approaching overseers. Where? She called out, not bothering to mask the urgency in her voice. The maintenance tunnels, Jax replied. Last I checked, the guards aren't programmed to fit their bulk down those narrow spaces. Plus, they're not fond of the dark, Sierra raised an eyebrow. And you are? Not really, Jax admitted, but I'd rather face my fears than face a firing squad. You're full of sunshine, Thorn. Comes with the territory. As the humans and their reluctant alien allies began retreating toward the tunnels, Jax noted the subtle shift in the air, a tension that made the hairs on his neck stand up. The overseers had begun to fan out, and it was only a matter of time before they cut off all routes of escape. This just keeps getting better, Bront murmured, keeping to Jax's side like a shadow that could body slam you. Yeah, Jax said. Next thing you know, we'll find out the cafeteria's out of coffee. By the time they reached the tunnels, the overseers had closed in, but the makeshift alliance of prisoners managed to slip inside just as mechanical guards began firing, their weapons flashing in the dim light like angry fireflies. The tunnels were as cramped and unwelcoming as Jax remembered, the kind of place that would make a rat feel claustrophobic. They twisted and turned, leading deeper into the bowels of the Bastille, where the air was thick with the smell of oil and despair, and the occasional flickering light was a reminder that maintenance wasn't high on anyone's list of priorities. This way, Jax said, guiding the group deeper into the labyrinthine network. Here, the sounds of pursuit were muted, the overseer's attempts to follow stymied by the narrow confines. Care to share what the hell we're doing down here? Sierra asked, her voice echoing in the confined space. Trying not to die horribly, Jax replied. Secondary objective, find out who's behind this mess and stop them before they get us all killed. That's your plan, more of a guideline really, Jax admitted. Crix, trailing behind with a couple of his Paxian kin, made a noise that was either laughter or resignation. It is a bold strategy, human. I can see why your kind is known for unpredictability. Yeah, we're real mavericks, Jax said. Come on, there should be a junction up ahead where we can regroup. The junction was little more than a wider section of tunnel where pipes and cables converged in a tangle that would make any engineer weep. It was also where Jax had stashed a few supplies, just in case he ever needed to disappear into the underbelly of the Bastille for a while. Welcome to my office, Jax said, gesturing at the grimy expanse. Charming, Sierra said flatly. It's cozy, Bront added, which coming from him was high praise. Jax retrieved a small stash of rations and a couple of tools he'd pilfered over the years. We've got two priorities. Figure out who's behind this sabotage and stop them. Then we can worry about getting out of this place. And how do we do that? Crix asked, settling into a corner with the grace of a mantis at rest. By being clever, quick, and maybe a little bit lucky, Jax replied. The good news is the overseers are predictable. They won't venture too far into the tunnels, so we've got a bit of breathing room. Small comfort, Sierra muttered. Small comforts are all we've got right now, Jax said, offering her a ration bar. Let's focus on what we can control. As they planned their next steps, the group settled into an uneasy truce, united by necessity if not by choice. There was an unspoken understanding that any grievances would have to wait until they weren't all under the threat of imminent death. So, any idea who's behind the sabotage? Sierra asked, breaking the silence. Not yet, Jax admitted. But I know someone who might. He turned to Crix. Your people have eyes everywhere, right? Any chance you can find out who's been poking around where they shouldn't? Crix considered, his gaze unreadable. Possible. But it will take time. Time we don't have, Jax said. But it's better than nothing. We will do what we can, Crix promised, though his tone suggested no guarantees. Good enough, Jax said. In the meantime, we need to figure out how to secure the singularity gates. If they fail, we'll be trapped here forever. No pressure, Bront grunted. Jax sighed, rubbing the back of his neck as he glanced around the dingy tunnel. Never thought I'd miss the days when my biggest worry was finding enough credits for a decent meal. How long do you think we have before they find us? Sierra asked, shuffling her feet against the cold metal floor. Hard to say, Jax replied. But we can't stay still for long. Sooner or later they'll realize we're hiding out down here, right? Sierra said, her voice steady even as tension simmered beneath the surface. Let's make sure we're ready when that happens. Jax gave her a nod, feeling a flicker of something that might have been camaraderie. It was a strange sensation, working with others, relying on them as much as they relied on him. Strange, but not entirely unwelcome. All right, let's get to work, he said, clapping his hands together. We've got a prison to save and a few lives to spare. As they set about their tasks, Jax couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, they stood a chance. It was a long shot, sure, but it was better than nothing. And in the Celestial Bastille, where hope was as rare as good wine, a long shot was sometimes the best you could hope for. The maintenance tunnels of the Celestial Bastille were a lot like Jax's childhood. Dark, unpredictable, and full of things waiting to bite you in the arse. As they navigated the twisting maze, he couldn't shake the feeling they were being herded like cosmic cattle towards slaughter. But he'd be damned if he let that happen without a fight. Think the overseers have figured out we're down here yet? Bront asked, his voice bouncing off the damp walls. He always had a knack for asking the questions everyone else was too afraid to voice. Probably, Jax replied with a shrug that suggested he'd given up on hope and reason long ago. But let's hope they're too busy running their bureaucracy to actually do anything about it. Trust me, Bront said. The only thing more inefficient than this prison is a council meeting. Touché. Though I'd kill for a pencil pusher right now, might be less murderous than our current company. Jax gestured to the dimly lit tunnel ahead, where the faint sounds of mechanical footsteps echoed like the world's worst remix. Sierra interrupted, ever the practical one. We need a plan that doesn't involve hoping our enemies have an existential crisis. Funny you mention that, Jax said. I was just thinking, what if we flipped the script a bit? Sierra raised an eyebrow. You mean convince the overseers to join us instead of trying to slice us to ribbons? Yeah, Jax nodded. We can't outgun them, but maybe we can outthink them. Make them see we're not just a bunch of inmates waiting for the axe to fall. That's a nice, optimistic thought, Bront said, and I'll leave it on your tombstone. Jax smirked as he scanned the tunnel for any sign of the junction they were aiming for. Look, we start by finding that one overseer who might be a little less trigger-happy than the rest. There's always one. Right, Sierra said. The alien equivalent of a hall monitor. And what exactly do we say to them? Jax shrugged. I dunno. Hello, we're the charming inmates who'd like to propose an alliance before we all get atomized. Something like that. Crix, who had been trailing along silently, chose this moment to speak up. The overseers are not known for their open-mindedness. Then let's give them a reason to reconsider, Jax said. We prove the saboteur's not one of us, and maybe we can get them to see us as more than just meat in cells. Sierra made a skeptical noise. And how do you propose we do that? By finding some common ground, Jax replied. We all want the same thing, right? Not to die horribly when the prison systems fail. Solid point, Bront conceded. But if you think an overseer's going to hold hands and sing Kumbaya, you're dreaming. I'm not saying it'll be easy, Jax said. But I've pulled off crazier stunts. The tunnel suddenly widened into the junction they'd been searching for, a cramped space cluttered with equipment that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Jax let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "This is it," he said. "Our little slice of paradise. More like a garbage dump," Sierra muttered, but she was quick to get to work, checking their supplies and formulating her own plans. Crix, who seemed to be watching the proceedings with the bemusement of someone at a particularly weird zoo, clacked his mandibles thoughtfully. "The overseers are driven by logic. If we can convince them of the threat, they may be forced to listen." "Exactly," Jax said. "We just need to make them see the logic in not letting us all die." "Sure," Bront snorted. "I'll just send a do not kill memo their way." Jax rolled his eyes. "Come on, Bront. You know you love a good challenge." "Nothing about this is good," Bront grumbled, but he didn't argue further. They set up a makeshift camp, if you could call a few scattered pallets and a malfunctioning heater a camp. But in a place like the Bastille, you learn to make do with less than nothing. "All right," Jax said, sitting down and stretching out his legs. "Let's go over what we know. Someone's sabotaging the gates. The overseers are too busy being overlords to realize they are about to be screwed as much as we are." "Sounds about right," Sierra said, unwrapping a ration bar with the enthusiasm of opening a tax bill. "We need to make contact with the overseers," Jax continued. "But first, we need proof that someone's working against them and us." Crix, who had taken a seat on a stack of crates, looked thoughtful. "Perhaps there are signs of tampering in the mainframe. If we can access it, we might find evidence of the saboteurs' work." Sierra nodded. "But getting there without being turned into space dust is the tricky part." "So, it's settled then," Jax said with a grin that was more bravado than anything else. "A little B&E on the mainframe before brunch." "Count me out of the brunch," Bront said. "But I'm in for the rest." They set about gathering what meager resources they had, and Jax couldn't help but marvel at their ragtag group. A mix of species, motivations, and attitudes, all united by the simple desire to keep breathing. "All right, everyone," Jax said, "let's get some rest. Tomorrow we make our move." As they settled in for the night, Jax lay awake, the weight of their plan pressing down on him. It was risky, sure, but he'd lived his life on the edge and he wasn't about to change that now. He closed his eyes, letting the distant hum of the Bastille lull him into a restless sleep. Tomorrow was going to be a hell of a day. Morning, or whatever passed for morning in the eternal twilight of the Bastille, came too soon. Jax awoke to the sound of grumbling and the clatter of ration packs. "Rise and shine," Sierra said, tossing a bar at him. "Time to save the day, or die trying," Bront added, earning a glare from Jax. "Right," Jax said, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "Let's get moving." Their journey through the tunnels was uneventful, if you didn't count the constant threat of being discovered and executed. When they finally reached the access point Crix had mentioned, Jax took a moment to breathe. "All right," he said, turning to the group. "We need to be quick. In and out before anyone notices. Just like my first marriage," Bront quipped, earning a snort from Sierra. They worked quickly, with Sierra and Crix at the controls, Jax and Bront keeping watch. The tension was palpable, each of them acutely aware of the stakes. "Got it," Sierra said suddenly, her voice tinged with triumph. "There's definitely been tampering. Someone's been messing with the gate controls, someone who knows their way around the system." "Great," Jax said. "Now we just need to convince the overseers they're not the top of the food chain anymore." "Good luck with that," Bront muttered, but there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. They retraced their steps, headed back to the junction where they'd set up camp. Jax's mind was a whirl of plans and contingencies, each more tenuous than the last. Back at base, they regrouped and Jax laid out their next move. "We've got what we need. Now we just need to find an overseer who'll listen." "Easier said than done," Sierra pointed out. "These guys aren't exactly known for their empathy." "Maybe not," Jax conceded, "but they're not stupid. They have to realize that if the gates fail, they're as doomed as we are. Desperation makes for strange bedfellows," Crix observed, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the dim light. "Exactly," Jax said. So let's give them a reason to see things our way. They were interrupted by the sound of footsteps, heavy, metallic, and undeniably ominous. Jax's heart skipped a beat as he motioned for silence. "Looks like we've got company," Bront said quietly, his hand on the hilt of the makeshift weapon he carried. "Stay calm," Jax said. "Let's see if we can talk our way out of this." The footsteps grew louder, and soon the silhouette of an overseer appeared at the tunnel entrance, flanked by a pair of mechanical guards. The overseer paused, its multifaceted eyes scanning the group with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing lab rats. Jax stepped forward, arms raised in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "We need to talk." The overseer's response was a series of clicks and whirs that Jax's translator chip struggled to keep up with. "Prisoners are not authorized to leave designated areas. Look, we're not trying to cause trouble," Jax said, trying to keep his voice steady. "We've got information, important information. The gates are sabotaged. If they fail, we're all in deep trouble." The overseer tilted its head, the gesture strangely human. "The prisoners are not permitted." Yeah, we get it," Jax interrupted. "But right now, rules are the least of our worries. This prison is a powder keg, and unless you want to be here when it blows, you might want to hear us out." There was a tense silence, the kind that usually preceded a violent shutdown or a really bad comedy act. Jax held his breath, hoping his gamble would pay off. Finally, the overseer made a noise that was either a sigh or the result of indigestion. "The information will be evaluated." "Great," Jax said, though he didn't dare lower his guard. "Now let's work together to fix this mess before it's too late." The overseer hesitated, then gestured to its guards. "Follow." As they fell into step behind the overseer, Jax exchanged a glance with his companions, one that said, "This might just work, see." Jax whispered to Bront. "I told you they'd listen." "Let's hope they keep listening," Bront replied, his expression guarded. "Don't worry," Jax said, more to himself than anyone else. "We'll make sure they do." The overseer led them through the winding tunnels, and Jax felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. It was fragile as a peace treaty written on tissue paper, but it was there. And in the celestial Bastille, where life was measured in moments of despair, hope was a rare and precious thing. The celestial Bastille was a hellhole, but at least it was a diverse hellhole. Underneath its dubious architectural genius was a melting pot of species who found solace in shared cynicism. As Jax and his motley crew followed the overseer through the winding tunnels, it was hard not to reflect on the irony of their situation. Here they were, prisoners trying to save their captors. Life was a twisted joke, and the punchline was always painful. "Remind me," Bront grumbled as they trudged along. "Why are we helping these tin cans again?" "Altruism," Jax replied with a sardonic grin. "Or maybe it's just the hope of seeing tomorrow's sunrise." "Hard to say." "Huh," Bront huffed. "Sunrise, that's rich. More like the dim flicker of our overheated light bulb back at camp." Sierra rolled her eyes but said nothing, focusing on the path ahead. Crix, meanwhile, was silent, likely contemplating the existential dread that came with being a bug in a galaxy full of boots. As they reached a wide, industrial corridor that looked like the forgotten innards of an ancient god, Jax felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. Somehow, the overseer's willingness to listen was more terrifying than outright hostility. Failure wasn't just a possibility, it was a probability. And if things went sideways, there'd be no shortage of people to blame him. The overseer, a tall, spindly figure with glowing eyes like headlights in the gloom, stopped suddenly. "This way," it said, its voice like the grinding of disused gears. "Cozy," Jax muttered under his breath as they entered what seemed to be a control room. It was a symphony of blinking lights, each promising a different kind of malfunction. "The mainframe interface," the overseer said, gesturing towards a panel that looked like it had been hacked together by a particularly sadistic child. "Provide your evidence." Sierra stepped forward, fingers flying over the controls with the confidence of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. "All right, Let's see what we've got, she said, plugging in a device that might have once been a calculator in a happier life. Bront leaned against a console, eyeing the overseer. So, what's your deal? You always hang around in places like this, or do you have a hobby? The overseer didn't respond, which Bront took as an invitation to continue. I've always been curious about the whole emotionless machine thing. How do you guys unwind after a long day of oppressing the masses? Jax shot him a warning look. Focus, Bront. Hey, just making conversation. Crix, who had been observing the interaction with mild interest, clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. Perhaps they meditate on the futility of existence. Pretty sure that's our job, Sierra said, not looking up from her work. Ah, here we go. Looks like someone's been playing fast and loose with the gate algorithms. Classic sabotage. Jax turned to the overseer, his expression grim. There's your proof. We're all floating on the same sinking ship. The overseer studied the data, its mechanical eyes flickering. This information corroborates recent anomalies in gate function. Great, Jax said, clapping his hands together. Now can we stop this thing from turning into cosmic confetti? The overseer hesitated. It was the kind of pause that usually preceded a death sentence or a particularly dire tax audit. Assistance will be required, it finally said. The mainframe must be stabilized. Looks like it's time to play hero, Bront said, voice dripping with sarcasm. Aren't we lucky? Thrilled, Jax replied, and meant it more than he cared to admit. There was something about the impending disaster that made him feel alive. Or maybe that was just the adrenaline talking. All right, team, Jax said, rallying his ragtag group. Let's stabilize this gate before it swallows us whole. As Sierra continued her work, Jax thought about how much they'd changed since they first found themselves locked away in this intergalactic recycling bin. Who'd have thought prisoners could become heroes? Not the Galactic Council, that was for sure. Crix, ever the philosopher, clacked his mandibles. It is curious how a shared threat can unite even the most disparate of beings. Yeah, nothing like the threat of imminent death to bring folks together, Bront added. Almost makes you miss the good old days of solitary confinement. At least then we didn't have to worry about saving the entire galaxy, Sierra said. No one told me heroism would be this exhausting, Jax snorted. Welcome to the club, Sierra. Membership comes with a lifetime supply of disappointment. The overseer, apparently unmoved by their banter, continued its watchful vigil. Stabilization process must commence immediately. Yeah, we know, Jax said, rolling his eyes. Just give us a second to bask in the futility of our situation. The sarcasm was its own kind of comfort. In a way, it was their armor, deflecting the oppressive reality of what lay ahead. Okay, Sierra said finally, I've rerouted power to the auxiliary systems. That should buy us some time. Let's hope it's enough, Jax replied, moving to assist with the manual systems. Or we're all going to be scattered stardust by tea time. As they worked, Jax glanced at the overseer. So, what happens after? We save the day, you go back to pretending we're not worth the rust in your servos. The situation will be reassessed, it replied, which was about as definitive as a politician's promise. Reassessed? Great, because we live for bureaucratic efficiency, Bront said with a shake of his head. Less snark, more work, Sierra chided, her focus never wavering. The minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. Jax could feel sweat prickle along his spine, the pressure mounting like a countdown to oblivion. If he was being honest, he didn't really expect any of this to succeed. But then, hope was a persistent bastard, even in the darkest of times. Finally, the overseer spoke, a note of urgency in its voice. Incoming fluctuation detected, precautionary measures required. That's our cue, Jax said. Everyone ready as we'll ever be, Sierra answered. Bring it on, Bront muttered. Crix simply nodded, a gesture of solidarity that spoke volumes. They sprang into action, working in unison like a well-oiled, albeit slightly dysfunctional machine. For once, it felt like they were more than just inmates, more than just numbers in a system that barely acknowledged their existence. Stabilization sequence initiated, Sierra called out, her voice steady despite the tension crackling in the air. "How's it looking?" Jax asked, trying to keep his tone light and failing miserably. "Like a house of cards in a hurricane," Sierra replied, her fingers dancing over the controls with precision. "Perfect," Jax said. "Just the way I like it." The overseer moved to assist, its mechanical limbs a blur of motion. For a moment it almost seemed like they were on the same side, an odd camaraderie formed from necessity rather than choice. "Sequence holding," Sierra reported, her relief almost palpable. "Let's just hope it sticks," Jax said, the weight of their situation settling back onto his shoulders like an old, unwelcome friend. They continued to work, each second a battle against the clock, and in those moments Jax realized something. Maybe they weren't so different from the overseers after all. Both were trapped in their own ways, bound by circumstance and duty. As the stabilization sequence neared completion, he found himself hoping, against all odds, that this time they'd really get through it. "Sequence stabilized," the overseer stated, its tone as close to congratulatory as Jax figured it could get. "We did it," Sierra said, disbelief coloring her voice. "For now," Bront cautioned. "Let's not start popping the champagne just yet." Crix, who had been silent during the fray, finally spoke. "The threat has been contained, but it is only a temporary reprieve." "Yeah, but I'll take that over a permanent end," Jax said. "Survival's a win in my book." The overseer regarded them with those eerie, luminous eyes. "Your efforts have been noted." "Noted," Bront echoed with a snort. "Sounds like a glowing endorsement to me," Jax chuckled. "Hey, I'll take it. Not every day you get a pat on the back from a glorified toaster." With the immediate threat averted, an odd sense of peace settled over the group. It wasn't much, but it was something. A small victory in a life that rarely offered them. "Guess we're not so useless after all," Bront said, a rare smile playing on his lips. Sierra shook her head. "Even I didn't see this coming." "None of us did," Jax admitted. "But maybe that's the point. Just goes to show that even in a place like this, there's more to us than meets the eye." As they made their way back to their makeshift base, Jax couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Maybe things would change. Maybe they'd finally start being seen for more than just their mistakes. It was a fool's hope, perhaps. But in the celestial Bastille, where dreams went to die, even a fool's hope was worth clinging to. "Well," Jax said, "that was fun." "Define fun," Bront replied. "Not dying," Jax said with a grin. "That's fun." And as they settled back into the familiar shadows of their temporary home, Jax allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. They'd faced death and lived to tell the tale. Tomorrow would deal its own hand, but for now they had this. And in the harsh reality of the celestial Bastille, that was enough. The control room of the celestial Bastille, now a little less likely to explode, was strangely quiet, a rarity in a place where silence usually meant something had gone disastrously wrong. Jax was perched on the edge of a console, watching his ragtag band of unlikely heroes. Sierra was still at the mainframe, as if the galaxy depended on her pressing the right button, which it did. Bront was leaning back, hands behind his head, looking like a man who'd just gotten away with murder, which in some cosmic sense they all had. Crix, the silent philosopher, was observing the blinking lights with a bemusement that only a bug-like creature could muster. "So are we heroes now?" Bront asked, a smirk stretching across his face. "Think we'll get medals?" Jax replied, deadpan. "Or maybe just some extra gruel at dinner. Hell, I'd take a decent cup of coffee. Or anything that doesn't taste like recycled despair," Bront said, stretching his arms with a yawn. "Let's not get too carried away," Sierra chimed in, unplugging her device from the mainframe. "The last thing we need is to start believing our own hype." "Yeah, I'm not ready for that kind of responsibility," Jax said, jumping down from the console. "Not dying is enough of a job description for me." The overseer, still present, turned its glowing gaze upon them. "Your efforts have resolved the singularity gate malfunction. The crisis has been averted, see. We're bloody legends," Bront said, earning an eye roll from Sierra. "Legends with the lifespan of a mayfly in a bug zapper," she retorted. "If we're lucky." Crix's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. In surviving, we have achieved a rare form of success. Don't get too philosophical on us, Crix, Jax warned, though he couldn't help but smile. You might give us ideas above our station. Their banter was interrupted by the sound of mechanical footsteps echoing through the corridor. A whole lot of mechanical footsteps. It seemed their unscheduled attempts at heroism hadn't gone entirely unnoticed. Well, look who's coming to join the party, Bront said, tilting his head toward the doorway. Maybe they're bringing us those medals, Sierra suggested, her tone as dry as the Martian desert. As the mechanical guards filed into the room, Jax couldn't help but feel a pang of unease. They were imposing figures even on a good day, and this was far from a good day. Looks like we've got company. And I didn't even bake a cake. The overseer stepped forward, addressing the guards. The situation has been resolved. Stand down. The guards hesitated for a moment, which might have been alarming if it wasn't so routine. In the Celestial Bastille, malfunction was practically a part of the job description. Glad to see they are as efficient as ever, Bront said. Makes me feel a lot better about our chances. One of the guards stepped forward, its voice a deep monotone. Prisoners Jax, Thorne, Sierra, Bront, and Crix. You are to be escorted to the Assembly Hall. Assembly Hall. This isn't a school field trip, is it? Jax asked, feigning ignorance. More like a pop quiz, I'd wager, Sierra muttered. And we didn't study. With the guards flanking them, they were led through the labyrinthine corridors of the Bastille. Jax couldn't help but notice how oddly subdued everything seemed. For a place usually teeming with chaos, there was an unusual calm in the air. The assembly hall was packed with inmates from all corners of the galaxy, a colorful collection of dubious characters, whose only unifying trait was their shared disdain for authority. Jax and his crew were guided to a podium at the front of the room, a place usually reserved for announcements everyone wished they could ignore. Looks like we've got an audience, Sierra said, glancing over the crowd. Hope they don't expect a speech, Jax said. I left my soapbox in my other pants. The overseer, which had followed them at a respectful distance, stepped up to the podium. Attention, inmates. A resolution has been achieved through the actions of your fellow detainees. The crowd murmured, a mix of skepticism and curiosity. It wasn't every day that prisoners were credited with saving the day. Great, Bront whispered. Now we're the most popular kids in school. Enjoy it while it lasts, Jax replied. Fame is fleeting, and in this place it's probably an early death sentence. Due to their actions, the overseer continued, the Singularity Gate crisis has been resolved without further incident. That's putting it mildly, Sierra said under her breath. In recognition of this, the Galactic Council has decided to reassess certain protocols regarding interspecies relations within the Celestial Bastille. The overseer's words hung in the air like a particularly stubborn smell. No one quite knew what to make of it. Reassess protocols. Translation. They haven't got a clue what to do next, Bront quipped. Do they ever? Jax asked, crossing his arms. The council's got more red tape than a bureaucrat's Christmas tree, Crix, ever the optimist in his own peculiar way, added, perhaps this will lead to changes that benefit us all. Maybe they'll give us all a holiday, Bront said. Preferably somewhere that's not a floating space prison. As the overseer wrapped up its announcement, the room filled with hesitant applause, a sound as confused as the situation itself. It was as if the inmates were clapping not so much because they wanted to, but because they figured it might be expected. Congratulations, Sierra said, nudging Jax. You're officially a hero. How's it feel? Overrated, he replied. I think I preferred it when we were just trying not to die. Once the announcement was over, the crowd began to disperse, the inmates returning to their routines, or what passed for routines in the Bastille. Jax and his crew lingered near the podium, unsure of what came next. So, what do we do now? Sierra asked, glancing around as if the answer might be hiding in the shadows. Go back to being miserable, I expect, Jax said, but with a slight air of accomplishment. The overseer approached them, its eyes glowing with unreadable intent. Your contribution has been noted by the Galactic Council. You may expect adjustments to your confinement terms. Adjustments, Bront echoed. That's a nice way of saying we'll be watching you even more closely. Such is life, Crick said, his tone as philosophical as ever. Before they could continue their exchange, a familiar figure emerged from the crowd, a tall, grizzled inmate named Yull, whose reputation for stirring trouble was matched only by his ability to talk his way out of it. "Hey, Jax," Yull called out, his voice a gravelly drawl. "Heard you pulled some kind of miracle out of your backside." "Guess I did," Jax replied, eyeing Yull warily. "Wasn't exactly intentional," Yull chuckled, a sound like rocks grinding together. "Intentional or not, it's got folks talking. Might even earn you some respect around here." "Respect?" Bront said with a snort. "In this place that and a buck'll get you a cup of sludge." "Maybe so," Yull said, casting a glance at the overseer. "But there's talk of some changes coming. And change means opportunity." "Opportunity?" Jax asked, raising an eyebrow. "Aren't you the one who always says the only opportunity in this place is a faster route to the morgue?" "That's still true," Yull replied with a grin. "But you never know. Maybe this time things'll be different, right?" Sierra said. "And maybe they'll start serving steak in the cafeteria." As Yull wandered back into the throng, Jax couldn't help but wonder if there was some truth to his words. Could this really be the start of something different? Or was it just another illusion, a brief moment of hope before reality came crashing back down? "Come on," Jax said, turning to his crew. "Let's get back to our quarters. Who knows, maybe we'll find a cake waiting for us." "I wouldn't count on it," Bront said, following Jax as they made their way through the dispersing crowd. "But I could sure use a drink." The corridors of the Bastille were as familiar as the back of Jax's hand, each twist and turn ingrained in his memory. But today, they felt a little less oppressive, a little less like the walls were closing in. As they reached the entrance to their quarters, Jax paused, looking back at his crew. "You know, maybe there's something to this hero stuff after all. Don't let it go to your head," Sierra warned, though her smile took the edge off her words. "Yeah," Bront added. "Next thing you know, you'll be running for president of the Inmates Union." Jax laughed, a sound that felt good in his chest. "Not a chance. But maybe, just maybe, we'll get to see something change around here." Crix clicked his mandibles, a subtle nod of agreement. "Change is inevitable. Perhaps this time it will be for the better." As they settled back into their quarters, the weight of the past day finally beginning to lift, Jax allowed himself a moment of optimism. It wasn't much, but it was something. A glimmer of hope in a place that had long since forgotten what hope felt like. And in the celestial Bastille, that was a rare and precious thing.